The following podcast is taken from a live broadcast on Inspire FM.
Assalamu alaikum and welcome to the weekly parenting show on Inspire 105.1 FM. Your host is myself, Sister Naveed. And today I just have Sister Shabina with me. So inshallah, it will just be me and Sister Shabina, inshallah, trying to do justice to the next topic of the Ramadan series. Unfortunately, other sisters are unwell this week, aren't they, Shabina? Assalamu alaikum to you.
Yes. Walaikum salam.
We've got a lot of ill sisters, unfortunately. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give them shifa. So yeah, we'll see what we can do with today's show, inshallah, between the two of us. Hopefully, inshallah, there'll be justice done to it, isn't it, Shabina?
Inshallah. Inshallah, we can talk enough.
We can in general. Well, specifically, we'll see, inshallah. Out there to the listeners, feel free to leave us any feedback. Today's show is a pre-recorded show. It is a show that's part of the Ramadan series, which we began last week. And we will be running the Ramadan series right up until the end of Ramadan. If there's anything that you feel we've missed out, if there's anything that you think, okay, this would be a good topic to do, and the sisters haven't quite thought of it on the parenting show, we are open to feedback. We are open to suggestions and comments. So please do feel free to contact Inspire FM and leave feedback for the parenting show. That will be fed back to us and we will appreciate it. So the number to contact us on is 07779481822 with any text messages that you have, or you can ring in on 01582481822. Our shows should be uploaded on YouTube. They might even be available to listen live on YouTube. If you just type in Inspire FM Parenting Show, our show should be there. Our last show should be there. There might even be a lot of the previous shows available as well. You can also connect and listen in via the Facebook page. So you can type in Inspire FM Luton and the show should be live on the Facebook page at the time of its airing, thank you, on the radio, and you can then listen back or share the show with others, inshallah. Yep. So Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. At the time of the airing of today's show, Shabina, which is pre-recorded, inshallah, it will be the first of Ramadan for some maybe, and the second of Ramadan for some maybe, on Tuesday night. And as we draw closer and closer and we enter into the days of Ramadan, I thought it'd be really good to revisit. We have done this topic many times before in the previous years. We have been on air for 5 years, mashallah. Ramadan, the month of the Qur'an, I thought was a very important topic because that is what Ramadan is about. And it's a topic that really, really resonates and sits very closely to the whole purpose of Ramadan. So I just want to throw the first question out to you, and I will help you through as well. But what's the significance of Ramadan, and how is the Qur'an connected to the month of Ramadan? How do you understand this? How do you explain this to your children? Do you revisit it every year? How does it work for you, Shabina?
We do revisit it every year because we forget. For me, obviously, Ramadan is the time that the Quran was revealed, and that's the significance. This is the time that the Quran was revealed, and building that relationship with the Quran is, our aims, should be our aims this Ramadan, and building our relationship with Allah should be our aims. And I think for me, when it comes to just like a few days before Ramadan, the conversations that I have with my children are, what do they want to achieve? What do they want to achieve in Ramadan? What do they want? How do they want to get through it? Obviously, you asked the question, what do they want for iftar? But
that's the important question.
Before that, before that, you ask what do they want to achieve, especially the older ones. With my teenage daughter, definitely these conversations I'm having. What would they like to change? What are the improvements that they want to make? So we've gone through that, alhamdulillah. We've gone through quite a few of that. We've thought about targets that we want to achieve, what we want to cut back on, time that are wasted. How are we going to achieve, for example, reading the amount of Quran that we want to read? How are we going to achieve that? These conversations are really important. And, you know, because the Quran was revealed in this month, and that is one of the main significance of Ramadan.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're right. I mean, firstly, answering my own question there, it is very, very important to revisit this every single year. What's the significance of Ramadan? And not just for our children, but for ourselves. And it's not because we don't know, we don't have the knowledge or the information, but it's just to realign the intentions. And we talked about intentions last week in last week's shows. The actions are but by intention. And the purpose of Ramadan has to be very, very clear. And the purpose of Ramadan is the Qur'an, is the month in which was revealed the Qur'an. And key words, and there's lots of points that you made there, which I will come back to because I have been jotting things down whilst you were speaking. But just focusing on this aspect of it's the month in which was revealed the Quran as a guidance, and it has clear proofs, and it's a criterion, and these are key aspects. I mean, even if we study the tafsirs, which inshallah we have quite intensely, we've also done tafsir circles in the past for a number of years in the community, where we've really studied the work of the likes of Ibn Kathir on ayahs such as this in terms of what does it mean. And sometimes it can get really confusing, isn't it, Shabina, for people? Like, what does it mean when we say the Quran was revealed in the month of Ramadan? You know, did it not come down in bits over a period of 20 plus years to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam? So if it came down in bits to Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, then how was it revealed in the month of Ramadan? That can be quite confusing for people because it's either one or the other. And even that clarification to our children, to our future generations, and to ourselves is important to remember that it was lowered, wasn't it, to the lowest heaven in one kitab, in one book, and that lowering to the nearest heaven to us is the revelation, is the fact that it was revealed, it came down, and then from there it was given to Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam in bits over the period of years that Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam received the revelation. And that's what we're celebrating, aren't we? The coming of the Quran in that manner. Have you ever had that kind of a conversation with your kids? Your kids are younger. Have they asked the complicated questions, or maybe listeners out there might be thinking, "Oh my God, that's going to open up a whole hoard of questions."
Do you know what? No, they haven't actually. But that's really interesting because I haven't actually explained it to them like that. And I'm definitely going to take that back and have that conversation because I think it is very interesting.
Yeah, it clarifies things. Yeah. Yeah, and it's not just the Quran that was revealed in the month of Ramadan. All the books, all the scriptures, if we have a more intense study of this ayah and the understanding behind this, all the scriptures and the books for all the believers of the books were revealed on different dates of Ramadan. And this is what makes Ramadan so significant. And the Quran is the seal of all the books. So that's another interesting point to make a note of. And then the second point, the guidance for people. And I think this is another very important aspect. You talked about building the relationship with the Quran and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I think, I don't know, for yourself or for people around you that you may know, in terms of the relationship of guidance and clear proofs and a criterion, what do these words mean to us? When we think of these words, what does guidance, clear proofs, or criterion mean to yourself? How do you explain that to your kids? Your kids are younger. You've got a couple that are now coming into young adulthood, but have you ever had that kind of conversation, or even yourself as parents, between yourselves?
I have actually. Even with I think I've had these conversations with some colleagues as well.
Okay.
We were talking about Allah, and how Allah has created us. He is our Lord. But yet, how is Allah communicating with us? How is Allah telling us? What is that how do we know that Allah is telling us to, pray or telling us
Yeah.
to fast. How do we know this?
Yeah.
I did have this conversation recently, actually, and we were talking about, obviously Allah exists, Allah created us, He is the creator of the universe, He is
Yeah.
the most powerful, etc.
Yeah.
But what is that what is that connection? What is that
Yeah.
connection between Him and us? How do we know, that the Quran is the word of Allah? Because one of my colleagues did say that, well, obviously, the Quran. Then I asked her, well, how do we know that the Quran is the word of Allah? What is that link? And then she was a little bit confused, and then I went on saying how the Quran is a linguistic miracle, and that is that connection that proves to us that this is something from Allah, and there's a reason why Allah has revealed it to us. There's a reason why Allah has given us the Quran as a guidance. This is our manual. This is how to live our life. This, He has sent the Prophet Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam as a guidance, as an example. So take that on board. If we believe in Allah, we need to take on board that the fact that connection between us and Allah is the Quran, is that revelation.
You're right, and your words, linguistic miracle, and that is something that's very powerful and very important for us to understand. Like you said, alhamdulillah, you branched out, alhamdulillah, into the work life, and you're right. It's not just something. It's a parenting show that we just are going to have these conversations with our youth or our children, our young adults at home, or as a family, but rather in all parts of our life. People need to understand why we're so excited about Ramadan. My eldest was just saying this morning at the breakfast table, he was saying, oh, my friend at school, he's in one of the schools in the neighboring villages, and he was saying that my non-Muslim friend was saying, Ammar, why are you so excited about Ramadan? You're not going to be eating, you're not going to be drinking. I'm so confused. And he was explaining the significance of fasting in Ramadan. And his friend was getting more and more confused by the fact that, but you're celebrating this arrival of this Quran by not eating and drinking. And there has to be a connection, as you pointed out, with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You talked about building the relationship with Allah, and the fact that this is the word of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has decided that we will celebrate the arrival of Quran by having 30 days of no eating and drinking between dawn and sunset, and a few of the restrictions placed around it, and how we're going to enhance on this, and we're going to focus on ourselves. It's also like a month of self-reflection as well, isn't it? And it's a month of the fact that we question that like you said, the linguistic miracle of the fact that if I believe in Allah and I believe this is His book, so what is the Quran actually about? And if it is a guidance, like Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in this Surah Baqarah, in this ayah 185, He has made it so clear to us what the purpose of the Quran is. It's here to guide you. And you know how you have elders that give you stories about their past and their journey and their struggles and their experiences. And they tell you, one, because they want you to take heed, and two, there's a wisdom behind this. And the Quran, a certain portion of it is packed out with stories about the prophets, alayhi salams, and what they went through, and the great women of Islam, be it Asiya, be it Maryam alayhi salam, and so many more, what they went through and what their experiences were and what their hardships were, so that we can learn. And not just us, but even for Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, it was a form of moral support, wasn't it? That okay, I'm a prophet, I'm a messenger, but there were prophets and messengers before me, and they had struggles, and they had tests, and they had hardships, and they were unsure about what they should do or not do. Even the stuttering of Musa alayhi salam, which is an opening that we use for every single activity that we do, is something that I definitely say to myself before I begin every single show on the parenting show, for example, to myself. And it's something that we find comfort in, and that guidance of that reassurance that even Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam was given, that this is what I advised Musa alayhi salam to do, and you can take on that advice, and that thread back from Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam to Musa alayhi salam, that connection back, that guidance, even that wisdom behind this, that reassurance, it's warming, isn't it? It gives you a sense of warmth that, okay, I can do this, that energy boost in that manner. And to break it down to that level and in that way is quite amazing. Yeah. And then the clear proofs and criterion simply means, if we look up the definition for it, it's a way of life, isn't it? That's what it means. This is your guidance, this is your way of life, this is your set of rules. That means that we are taking on every single aspect, every yes, every no, every do, every don't, every like and every dislike from the Qur'an and nowhere else. Yeah. And that's very crucial and very, very important for us in that manner. So, there's so many different aspects. The Qur'an has laws, it has rules, it has commands, it has instructions, and at times it has stories to motivate us that, look, this might seem difficult, but you can do it. Yeah. Because the previous prophets did it, the previous people did it, the previous nations did it, although they were struggling and they had difficulties, whether it was in society or in family or whatever it might have been. And this is your reassurance. So follow my ahkam, follow my rules, my laws, my legislation, believe in it, connect with it, and you'll be fine. You can do this. And this whole manual, and you touched upon the word manual as well, Shabina, it's, I don't know, how do you break that down? How do you explain that?
I mean, if we believe Allah created us, and if He's our, if we believe He created us and has given us a guidance, why would we then not read that and not take that on board? For example, if we our iPhones or any machine that you buy, a Hoover, for example, how to use it, how to fix it, what to do with it, there'll be a manual to it. If we don't use that, we're going to be confused. We're not going to know. The person that created the Hoover, let's give Hoover as an example, created the Hoover, would know best how to deal with, how to fix things, what to do, what not to do. And we need to use that. We need to understand that analogy and connect it to, hang on, Allah has given us the Quran as a guidance, as a manual. And this is how we should live our life. He has told us, He has created us, and He knows us best. Therefore, He has, told us how we should live our life. And that's what we need to do. Apply the Quran to our lives and take strength from it. You're saying about the stories. I was thinking, when we go through struggles, the Quran has so much strength in it. We don't need to look for motivational, quotes made by humans. We can look at the Quran. That is motivational. That will bring up, wake us up, get us going.
Absolutely.
So that's what I was thinking.
And that is a very, very good point to make, because there's so much in relation to what we can connect back in different ways, whether it's personal or on a societal level or even on an international level, the struggles that we're going through and the strength. Ultimately, if you look to, for example, the situation of Gaza, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bring ease and peace and comfort to their hearts, and their strength isn't coming from our motivational quotes. I'm a life coach, and whatever I might be putting up is not what's motivating them, nor any other, much more successful life coach that might be out there. But their strength is coming from the ayahs of the Qur'an. So when you're at rock bottom, or when you're faced between a rock and a hard place, or you're challenged to your core, that strength will always resonate back to the Qur'an, without a doubt. And the more you know the Qur'an, and the more you understand the Qur'an, the more it will give you that comfort, like you said, and that reassurance and that stamina to get up and carry on, and to be confident, and to be useful in your struggle in the correct manner, with laws and rules.
Absolutely. It's like it'll give you a clearer vision of where you're going, where you're heading. Like obviously the Quran tells us descriptions of paradise, descriptions of, Jannah, Jahannam, these things. If we refresh our memory on that, we will have a clearer gut, will be our path will be clearer. We can see things clearer. And we won't live this life for the dunya. We'll be living it for, you know what, we want to attain Jannah. That's what we want. And it will, I just think our vision is clearer when we bring ourselves closer, when we read about these things.
And you're right. And there's times in life when we are grateful for having that clarity in our vision. And we can't do anything less than connect it back to the people of Gaza. We all say, oh, you know, we live for Allah, we die for Allah. The purpose of life is attaining Jannah. And then there comes a point where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala could randomly test any believer or any group of believers anywhere in the world. Nobody is safe from atrocity. Nobody is safe from the evil of the dunya. And therefore, that comes into play. That test comes into play. And the more we are connected with the Qur'an and the more we have had that vision that you're talking about the criterion and the guidance that my vision is to attain Jannah and to abstain from Jahannam, and that purpose is very, very clear, the more you will find sakina in the heart, you know, the tranquility within the heart, and that hardship becomes bearable. It's not that it's easy when you're starving and living through a famine and a genocide. There's nothing easy about that, but it's comforting to know that it's not going to end just here. It's not over just here. This is just the beginning. The ending of the dunya is just the beginning of eternity. And that's when the guidance of the Qur'an resonates in that manner, for example, about the purpose of your life. You know, you talked about the manual, and that's really interesting because I just ordered, honestly, something awful from an online shop that I've never used. You know, I'm not going to mention the name. And my family were like, why would you order from that? You know, it's just tacky stuff that comes out. I was like, I don't know. I just like this product. And I thought, you know what, let's have a look. Let's see how it is. I mean, when it's been put together, it's nice, but I wouldn't recommend anybody to go and shop from there anymore. Anyway, and it's my first and last purchase. But anyway, it didn't even come with instructions. So it wasn't put together, the item. It's like a Ramadan countdown pendulum thing, and I just thought it'd be nice to have, and it wasn't put together, and then there was no instructions on how to fix it, or be careful with this and be careful with that. And one of the little hook things that one of the numbers will hang off, it just snapped. It was just that awful. Anyway, hopefully one of my boys will be sorting that out for me. But the point is that the fact that there was no instructions with it, it was just baffling.
You were lost.
It's not like I didn't manage to put it together. I did, but I was like, how can you send an item that's not fixed, that's not put together, and not have instructions in the packaging? It's bizarre. It's just tacky. It's just unprofessional. It's unprofessional. I thought. And then at the back of my mind, because I was preparing for today's show as well, I was thinking, although those instructions might not have been like instructions that it's not like I'm putting together a bed, so that they're not the most needed. But even if you skim through instructions, it's reassuring, isn't it? It gives you that kind of reassuring feeling that they're available, they're there. There might be an instruction saying, be careful, the bits that you're going to be putting together, they're quite delicate, they might snap, they might break, and it's useful. There's useful little tips and instructions.
Even if there's a picture of what it needs to look like, that could be a little guidance.
And arrows pointing to, you know, how it's put together with very little wording. But this first item I've ever purchased that has come through without instructions, and I have to say I was flabbergasted. I was like, why are there no instructions in this item? And there needs to be instructions. And then you look to life and you think, we are the most complicated creation on this planet, human beings. How do we think we're going to get through life without any guidance or instructions from the one that created us? It makes no sense. It's irrational. And that's what this Qur'an is. And that's what it's about. And that's what it's been revealed for in this month of Ramadan, isn't it? And that is what we're celebrating, the arrival of this book in this manner. So that was just something that happened to me that made me feel and think in relation to the fact that instructions are so important. And yet we can be arrogant as human beings, isn't it? We could think, well, you know what, I think I know how I'm going to do this. I think I know how I'm going to live my life. based on my childhood and what happened to me, I know what I don't want my kids to go through, what I want to instill in my child, the confidence, the thinking. So we forget, like Ali radiallahu anhu said, that they're from a different times, which means that their issues and struggles are not going to be what your issues and struggles were. The comfort or the luxury or the ease that you give to your child might become their hardship for the future. Yeah. So you have to refer back to the Qur'an for guidance in how to create that resilience and that understanding of what the baseline is, and advice such as, Lut alayhi salam's advice to his son. Was it Lut or Luqman alayhi salam's advice to his son? All of these things, it was Luqman alayhi salam. And it's so important. Shabina, believe it or not, we've gone into the first break, so we'll be taking a break. We'll be back straight after, inshallah, and we'll continue with the second half of today's show. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu.
Assalamu alaikum, this is Atif Nawaz. Listen to Inspire FM shows in your time by heading over to inspirefm.org or listen on Apple Podcasts or Spotify.
Assalamu alaikum and welcome back to today's weekly parenting show on Inspire 105.1 FM. You are now going to be hearing the second half of today's show, inshallah, hosted by myself, Sister Naveed, and joining me for today's show is Sister Shabina. Assalamu alaikum again to you, Shabina.
Walaikum salam.
The topic for today's show is Ramadan, the month of Qur'an. And as we enter into the first few days of Ramadan, if this is a topic that we haven't explored or we haven't discussed or we haven't thought deeply about, then inshallah, I hope today's show benefits the listeners. The lines are open for any feedback, any comments, any questions, which will be fed back to us, inshallah, because it is a pre-recorded show. You are listening to this at 7 p.m. on Tuesday evening. So we are not doing it live. So the number to contact us on is 07779 481822. If you want to call in and leave any feedback, any suggestions for the Ramadan series or beyond, you can do so on 01582481822. We've been talking about the Qur'an, Shabina, and we've been focusing on the ayah of Surah Baqarah, verse 185. The month of Ramadan, in which was revealed the Qur'an, a guidance for the people and clear proofs of guidance and criterion. The ayah carries on, but we've just focused on the first very bit of this ayah. And of course, we can't do justice to the ayah in a 56 minutes show on a radio, inshallah. But just moving on from the fact that the Qur'an, the significance of the Qur'an, and so on and so forth, we touched upon the fact that how the Qur'an is celebrated. And the arrival of Qur'an in the month of Ramadan, the fact that we have no eating or drinking, and how this can be a strange thing in this, times where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has his own unique ways of celebrating things. And this builds on our taqwa, doesn't it? It builds on our love for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that we don't question it, because we celebrate by, whether we celebrate birthdays or weddings or whatever, with big massive feasts and lots of people. We have that at the end of Ramadan, but the build up towards Eid is one of contemplation, one of questioning this book and its arrival, and the respect that we have for the Quran, and the respect and the love and the bond that we have with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I want to move on to talk about the rights of the Quran, and this is something that the great classical scholars have broken down, and you find different scholars have broken it down into so many points, different amounts of points. Some will say 5, some will say 7. It's all about how it's broken down. But what I've found is that there's a general guideline of what is important. So when you think of the rights of Quran, I mean, have you ever thought about the rights of Quran? Has that ever crossed your mind about the fact that the Quran would have rights too, and why would it have rights? Why does the Quran have rights? Is that something you've ever thought about?
I mean, the rights of the Quran, the fact that the Quran is going to intercede for us.
Yeah.
In the Day of Judgment, the Quran is going to intercede for us. So obviously, it's got rights. The rights of the Quran. It's got rights over us. Sorry, my words are a little bit mumbled. It's got rights over us. The fact that we have to read it, the fact that we have to implement it, And the fact that, you know, we have to understand it. We have to take that effort to understand it. We have to read the tafsir of it. If we don't understand Arabic, we have to read the tafsir, read what scholars have said about these ayahs. And that is what's going to build our relationship with the Quran. That is what's going to make us understand it. And that's very important. It's not just merely just reciting continuously without understanding what the Quran is saying. That's not, you know, that's not the minimum that we need to do. We have to extend and try to understand the ayahs.
Yeah, you're right. And you're right. If the Quran, as it says in a Muslim hadith, there's so many more out there, recite the Quran because it will come on the day of judgment and intercede for its people. If the Quran is going to come and speak to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, so to say, and intercede on your behalf and put up a case with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala saying that this person learnt me, made effort to understand me, made effort to implement me, believed in me, believed that I was your word, Ya Rabbi, and you can't take this person into Jahannam. This person has to go to Jannah because of me, because of the bond it had with me, and I am your words. Whatever form the Quran takes to intercede for us, I'm merely paraphrasing there. That means that the Quran has rights, because anybody, I mean, if we look at the dunya, nobody does anything for anyone without saying, "Oh, okay, you owe me one," and that's a human perspective, you know, where you know, we think we have rights over each other, or you know, you have expectations, so rights and expectations, as even families and friends and colleagues and all relationships have rights and expectations. So why wouldn't the Quran have rights from us over us, and why shouldn't there be expectations of us if we expect the Quran to intercede for us in the Akhirah? So surely by just merely reciting the words, and doing a Khatm Quran in the month of Ramadan once a year isn't surely going to be enough. There has to be more than that. That surely can't be enough for just entering Jannah and the Quran interceding for you. And you're right, if we break down the rights of the Quran, you touched upon a few of them there, reciting it, understanding it, and implementing it. I just had a couple more. Belief in the Quran. So before we recite it, the belief, and we've touched on that, haven't we, in the first half of the show? I think we devoted 26 minutes to belief in the Quran. That is so important, because the way you will then recite the Quran or understand the Quran and want to implement the Quran will make a big difference, because that baseline's been established. There's no doubt about the fact that, is the Quran the word of Allah, or is it a book that was written by man, or was it a book that was written by Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam? You've dealt with that issue. That is crucial and important. It's an issue of your iman, of tawheed, of your aqidah, and that needs to be corrected. Then you do the recitation of it, and we know there's so many hadiths that talk about it, Shabina, in terms of reciting the Quran beautifully, eloquently, peacefully, and even the one with the tajweed, and even the ones where there's a hadith that talks about even if you're stuttering and stammering, you get the reward of reciting the Quran because of your effort that you're making, because of your love and your bond with the Quran. And that naturally leads to understanding, because if you know that the Quran is a guidance and a criterion, and it has clear proofs, then you want to understand what you're reading to form more of a relationship with it. And that leads to what you said, implementation. So the extra 2 points that I had was the first one of belief, which we've touched on in the first half of the show, and finally proclaiming the Quran, in our speech, action, and behavior. So calling others to the word of Allah, but not going out saying you must believe in the Quran, but sometimes that's demonstrated through your speech and your action and your behavior. So you will naturally call towards the Quran. You will, because you believe that this is so important, and it solves so many problems of the world and of individuals and of your life, and it gives you so much contentment in your heart and so much direction and perspective in your life, and so much understanding in your mind and your head, that you think, God, this is exactly what we need. So you will naturally call towards the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And these are the rights of the Quran, and how, you know, we've broke it down in our show today based upon the work of the great classical respected scholars. So like I said, we've touched on the belief aspect in the first half of the show. we've kind of touched upon recitation right now, unless there's anything else that you think you need to add, Shabina. But understanding, how do we do that? What does it mean to understand the Quran? How do you know you have? How do you explain that to others?
I mean, understanding the tafsir, understanding what scholars have said about, say, certain hukums.
Yeah.
And I think just doing that recitation and having that understanding will make our actions easier. I had this one sister ask me, "Oh, how I want to pray, but how can I what would lead me to continuously pray, because I keep missing it." But I want to, and I want to continuously, like, I want to make sure that I pray my salah. How can I do that? And this is when I had this conversation where, we need to strengthen our relationship, and we need to understand why we're doing things. Why are we praying why are you praying your salah? For what reason? And why are you worshipping? If we understand that, then our actions will be easier. Doing the action will be easier, because you'll have clearer vision. And I think that strengthening our belief will lead to our actions, lead to us doing our actions, and it's easier.
And the Quran talks about this as well, isn't it, Shabina? There's so much of the Quran. There's a whole surah, Rahman, that's dedicated to, then which of the favors of your Lord will you deny? That is a question mark. It's a rhetorical question where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala then tells us, I've done this for you, I've done that for you, but then which of the favors of the Lord will you deny? Oh, and then I've done this for you, and I've done that for you. And what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is constantly doing, if we just focus on Surah Rahman for a moment there, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is provoking thought within us. He's encouraging us to ponder, to contemplate, to think, to question, and to come to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with love, with respect, with faith, with a strong relationship, a strong bond with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that comes through, like you said, thinking. It comes through why, answering the questions of why. So I know I should pray. I've got the knowledge. I might have gone to enough Islamic studies classes, and may have even gone to an Islamic school in the past, or it might be immersed in my household, this whole knowledge of it and people praying. But then I struggle to do my 5 daily prayers. And that is because there's a problem between where I have knowledge and making that knowledge transpire into action, and like you said, there's a disconnection somewhere. So the disconnection might just be the what we call the bonding, which is the love, which is the like, which is the feelings being in line with the thoughts. And that's what understanding isn't just about having lots and lots of knowledge in your mind, and where you can reel off hadith and who reported it and what the source is, but actually it resonating within your heart, where you are liking what the Quran is telling you and you are disliking what the ahkam are in the Quran. So you are in tune with the punishments and the rewards, and it matters to you. I think understanding is about building what matters to you, because you will do what matters to you. And if it's not happening, is because in the heart it hasn't quite reached that optimum level of gratification, and that is what needs to be created, and that's really, really important. So the more we study the Quran, like you said, in tafsir, and not just tafsirs, discussion as well, isn't it? So you might want to be very honest and go to somebody that you trust and you respect, and that has good explanation techniques. Not knowledge. I'm going to say because you're going to burn in hell, and because there's a Jannah and there's a Jahannam, but actually knows how to get you feeling in line and understanding the context of what it means to pray. So it has to be important to you, and then you've got to make effort to go out and achieve this, and that's understanding, and that will be by the people around you that you're immersed in, and the thinking you're doing, and the feelings you're questioning your feelings. Why is this not happening? That naturally leads to implementation, isn't it? The application of it. You can't be making Quran significant if you're not implementing the laws and the rules, all of them of Quran. It's not a pick and mix shop. It's not like, oh, I'll implement the laws of Ramadan or the laws of ghusl or the laws of my rights, but I'll neglect it of the other aspects. It doesn't quite work like that. The implementation, the application of the laws and the rules and the ahkams that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is discussing in the Qur'an, they have to be implemented holistically and completely to the best of our ability, isn't it? So that application aspect is very, very important. That's also connected to belief, isn't it? And the aligning of your feelings. Your feelings need to be aligned for you to understand, and that understanding then naturally leads to implementation. Did you ever struggle with anything of a implementation? Anything that you can share on air, obviously. Was there a struggle that you ever faced?
I'm on the spot right now. What do you mean?
I've got one. Whilst you're thinking, I've got one.
Go on.
When I first started practicing, and God, this is going back a bit, when I was 20, 21, I remember struggling with the concept of, because I believe that I came into the opinion of covering your feet was fard as part of the aura. That was a struggle for me. And whereas for other people, maybe not wearing heavy makeup or heavy perfume that can be smelt or seen from a distance might have been their struggle, or even wearing the hijab might have been the struggle, or the jilbab. But for me it was the feet, because I never ever thought that feet were that, like rationally, logically, for me, that beautiful or that amazing. And then to think that you have to cover your feet was something that threw me a bit. And I know there's some opinions out there, even Imam Hanafi's opinion, covering of the feet is
but you can show it.
But because I came into the opinion of understanding Islam from a perspective of that involved covering of the feet, that meant that I had to have the application of that, unless I disagreed with that opinion at large. And so I had to work on that understanding. And the way that I rationalized it eventually was that sometimes there's things that you just do not understand, but Allah has made fard on you. And if this is opinion that I think is the strongest and the best for application, then I hear and I obey. Yeah, and that's what the Qur'an is about. It's about hearing and obeying, but not like a parrot, not like a robot, with conviction, with understanding. And at times, even if there's a principle such as the covering of the feet that I don't understand, but I know that covering of aura is fard, and this happens to be a part of that, is something that I must implement and I must apply, and I must then learn to love to apply to the best of my ability. Another struggle for me, God, I'm coming out with them now, as a one-man show on the show, is cooking. My cooking. I'd never cooked. I knew how to cook. Even now, if I take a step back, I can't say I enjoy cooking. People enjoy cooking on the weekend. I can imagine you do, Shabina. You enjoy cooking, I can imagine.
Yeah, I do. I like to get it over and done with.
Yeah. It can become a chore, but some people used to cook, even, before they had children or had a family. Whereas with me, it's literally, that's what made me come into it. But when I do it now, I remember a sister once saying to me, "Oh, Naveed, why are you taking so long with your onions and your garlic? Just put it all in and whack it together, and you're only cooking dinner for your family. It's not like you're having visitors over." But I had this refined, alhamdulillah, Allah keep it like that for me, thought in my mind that whatever I do, I have to do to the best of my ability to gain the highest level of reward. Because if I'm going to the effort of doing something, I want the highest level of reward for that. Otherwise, there's no point doing it. That's been my attitude, alhamdulillah, from the moment that I came into the deen, from thought and a scrutinization. And so for me, it was like, no, even if I'm cooking dinner for my kids or my husband or myself, if you're going to do it properly, get the highest level of reward from that action. But ironing, I mean, is something that I've disliked. And it's something that I've struggled with liking ironing. So when I have to do that weekly iron, and the boys are growing up now, from a parenting tip, I am telling them you have to learn to iron your own clothes and so on and so forth, generally anyway. But it's something I've still struggled with, but it's something that I implement. The application of this, the understanding of this, is purely from, I'm doing it for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and I want the highest level of reward, because If there's a struggle involved in the implementation and the application aspect, there's nothing more beautiful than saying, Ya Rabbi, this is a struggle for me on a personal level, but I'm doing it for your sake alone. And that's the best feeling, I think, because it's quite scary to get the reward for the easy stuff. You know, if you're not somebody who's ever worn makeup or wore a lot of makeup, that comes easy to you. That's not your struggle. If you've not really been into fashion or whatever, and you've started wearing your abaya, that might not be your struggle. And you might go around saying to sisters, what's so hard about that? But it's their struggle. It's a personal thing. And I think it's really important to sit with our children, to sit with our families, and to make that connection, that understanding the ahkam of the Qur'an and implementing the ahkam of the Qur'an. The Qur'an doesn't sit there and tell us you must iron clothes or you must make a curry, but there's a understanding behind whatever you do it to the best of your ability, to make your likes align with the Qur'an and to make your dislikes align with the Qur'an, and to understand what you're doing and to gain the highest level of reward if you're doing it for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that's the concept that's really important to understand. Then you can apply that template to everything and anything.
To everything. Yeah, you're right.
Go ahead, Shabina.
I would say, go ahead, share your struggles. I would say just generally, I don't really struggle with day-to-day things. You know, you're saying cooking or ironing or things like that. I don't really struggle with any of that. I would say, though, I do struggle with reading, and when it comes to reading the Quran. So I do struggle with that. And that's something that I'm saying to myself is when I do it, get the most, like, that's where my struggle is, and that's where I'm going to get most reward, because I am struggling with this. So I think that's, for me, I know that's what I struggle with. I have dyslexia, and I think that plays a part with it. When it comes to reading, understanding, things like that is slower. The process is slower for me, but I know the effort that I put into it, the time and effort that I do put into it, that is going to be, I will be rewarded for that, you know, more than the person that can fluently read. So
that's interesting, because when you opened up with that, I wonder if the listeners thought, oh my God, astaghfirullah, how can you be struggling with the reading of the Quran or the reciting of the Quran? But as you elaborated on that, with your dyslexia and your process being slower, and even the fact that it's a struggle, in general, it's the fact that this is it. We all have individual and personal struggles that we're going through, and things that we're finding difficult to bring in. Whereas for me, Shabina, reading, oh my God, I could read a book a day, and subhanallah, similarly, the recitation of Quran, I'm sure what the Tajweed would always need improving, because we're Southeast Asian and we have this way of reciting that we're constantly improving on, but that would be that even the recitation of the Quran or reading of books, that was always what I loved. So hence studying tafsir books came so easy. Nowadays you've got the YouTube videos or the other forms of social media where you can listen in on in interpretations of the Quran and so on. I've actually physically read my Ibn Kathir books and Bukhari's and Muslims and Riyad al-Salihin and Arhiq al-Makhtoum and so on and so forth. And before that, even general reading, it was something that I would love. So I think between us, we've showcased the fact that everybody's struggle is individual. Whereas ironing isn't that difficult for you. Coming into cooking, you were probably cooking bits and bats before you even
cleaning my
married.
house, gardening, maintaining my house. This is minor. I can do this. Posting, I can do it. Feeding lots of people, I can do this. It's easy. So it's I know that's not where where I'm gonna get most of my reward. It's not. It's where we struggle. What the things that we find hard, that's where our reward is.
Right. Shabina, coming to the final 2 minutes of our show, believe it or not, I think it's really important to connect it back to the fact that for most of us, or all of us, the struggle could also be the application of the Quran on a societal or an international level. So when we look to the fact that there's the circumstance of Gaza, that there's a solution for this from the Quran, and we might not be able to visualize, the solution from the Quranic perspective or how that's going to come into play. But the fact that we have to feel this, the fact that this Ramadan is so different to any of the other Ramadans, and our perspective on the issue of our unity as an ummah has to be deepened, has to also be there. So not only do we believe that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has promised victory to the Muslims and that there's a solution for this from Islam, and that's going to come into play like it always did for all the prophets, like it did for Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, it will for the ummah at large. But to actually believe that, I can't visualize how or what or when, but I must spend this Ramadan devoted to that dua, or to seeking that understanding of that implementation of the affairs of the people on that level.
We can't be hopeless.
We
can't be hopeless. This is from Shaitan. And that's something that we can't have. So we have to believe that there is going to be victory.
And there is going to be a solution. And there is going to be a solution. And to make dua for that, to approach this Ramadan with a difference, and to have that feeling and that connection, and then the proclamation of all of this, taking of it to other people happens naturally, isn't it? So as we finish with today's show, how as an individual do we bond with the Quran? How as a family do we bond with the Quran? What is our knowledge, love and action in relation to the Quran? What do the stories and the commands and the instructions of the Quran mean to us, and how do we apply that? And if we don't change or think this Ramadan, then when will we? Like I said, this is a Ramadan with a difference, and it needs to be approached as a Ramadan with a difference, with the belief in the fact that not only will Allah resolve my issues with the application of the Quran and the referencing of the Quran, but the whole problems of the world, not just Gaza, not just Palestine, but all the ummah that might be struggling everywhere in the world, and therefore they must be a part of our du'as as well, inshallah. Jazakallah khair, Shabina, for joining me today. Jazakallah khair for the listeners. Please keep us in your du'as this Ramadan and our families, and please forgive us for any shortcomings or mistakes in today's show or any of the past shows. Aquli qawli hadha wa astaghfirullah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu.
Thank you for listening to our podcast. Why not tune in to our live stream at inspirefm.org and follow and subscribe to our social media platforms at Inspire FM Luton.